I was 18 years at Tully Street sector, on the closure of the Tully Street sector and Butler's Wharf. I then moved to the Albert Dock, and I was very lucky actually, because there was a new container base opening, and I believe it was the first container base to employ dockers. It was a base that belonged to the Container Base Federation. In those days it was OCL and ACT, sort of mixture of various companies. And of course the container revolution was really the end of the dock game. So I was perhaps fortunate in that I really had a good employment after the closure of Tully Street, because some of them were less fortunate. Those who had to travel to Tilbury and places like that, I mean, it was, they had to start work at 7 o'clock in the morning with the shift work, and they had to be from London to Tilbury, so that was no joke for them, you know. So many of them turned the dock industry in because of that journey. And of course there were various things like severances and that come along. I wrote about severance in a sort of jocular way, which I've got there.
We'll have a look at that stuff later.
Yes. And severance was something that was good, progressive, because it started in, I think the first lot was in the London dock. There was a famous picture of the dockers leaving there piped with a pipe, bagpipes, and it wasn't for very much money actually. I forget how much. Wouldn't have been any more than about £750 or £1,000, which was perhaps a lot of money in the value in those days. But as the years went on, it increased, because the government were determined to get rid of the dock scheme. In taking away the national dock scheme and our registration, really it was the end of the life as dockers know it today. References in some of those papers should really hold it up.
We'll do that afterwards,
To no casualisation, the end of the unattached register. I'm afraid that the unattached register has now been created in a different way by the employers. They still employ men on a casual basis. I think as the years went on, it was a vicious scheme really, the dock scheme, because of the casual work to shape on a call with an employer, and there could be 100 men and he would come out with 20 tickets in his hand to pick his men, and that actually caused conflict with the men. I mean, if they felt that they were shunned by an employer, obviously they went away with a grievance. The whole system really was a system in which the dock worker would probably find himself in dispute with the employer in trying to keep his rights, as it was, you know. And of course the reduction of labour. When they were cutting labour, it meant that the unattached men were getting no work at all. The fortunate men in the docks really were the few that were employed on a regular basis, because as soon as the you understand that if a boat came in and it had 6 holes, they had to employ six ship's gangs and 6 shore gangs. When the ship went, they didn't need those men. They only needed enough men to deliver the cargo that had been lowered into the warehouses. One of the ends of the dock was the stacker truck. I can remember a dispute with the stacker truck that lasted weeks, and in the end the compromise was that they put a pendant in between the 2 stacker truck forks and used it as a crane. So they were actually lifting cargoes with a stacker truck using a crane hook. It was, you know, it's complete, because I can remember also some years later working in the same wharf where the men were in dispute because they never had a forklift truck. And I saw red and I said to them, same spot, date so and so, and you wanted me to go on strike because of the stacker truck, and now you want me to go in dispute because you haven't got a stacker truck. Because you see, it meant them lifting each single item, and it was harder work than lifting a pallet.
What was your job in the docks?
Well, I was a casual, some called them pikers. You was called a piker because you had a hook. And you could do any, a docker was they called you a labourer, dock labourer. We never had any stevedores in Tooley Street, which was where I was employed at the time. They called you a piker because you used a hook, but you were prepared to do any job. That was one of the things that a docker was a jack of all trades. He was really a very skilled man. I mean, those ships went to sea. If they weren't loaded properly, they turned over. A docker knew what he was doing, and he was so adaptable that he could be sent into any job anywhere and do that work if he was capable of doing it, of course, physically.
Was it hard work?
I don't really think that you... Can you understand, there's a Jaffa boat that used to come into Butlers at that particular time, and the Jaffas were in rather large cases, wooden cases in those days, heavy. The deck cargo would be the first thing you'd see, and then you started work on that boat. You shaped in the morning for the call. If the Jaffas were one of our best earners, so you shaped on the call hoping that you would get work, and you would always get a group of men dawn patrol. They would get there 5 o'clock in the morning sometimes even. And the wind, I mean in the winter, I mean because Jaffas came in the winter, mostly around the Christmas season. The wind would be blowing straight through from the river, and we know from the lightermen, you know, they say we was here at X time, that's the, from the barges, we were here and they were on the call then. So it caused a lot of disputes at that particular time with men who came later, to the call later, because they formed a barrier in front of you, and I've seen them push up behind and the call's been called off and they'd all have to go to the pen and then get sent back from the pen. You know.
Was you happy in the docks?
It was a wonderful life. I enjoyed being a casual docker because you never knew what the day was going to, you could either go home or you could with no work, or you never exactly knew what job you was doing, and moving from one wharf to another wharf, you met different people, and the sense of humour was terrific in those days, because everywhere you went somebody had a new type of joke, and that went away, I think, when we became regular, because you were amongst the same group of men all the time, like the humour went.
How close was you to those men in the regular gang?
To?
So when you was in a regular gang, how close did you become to those men?
We were brothers. Oh, we were brothers. Everybody, they're wonderful men, really, dockers. If you was in trouble, they were in trouble. It's a very close relationship. Also, of course, we had father-to-son relationships. I think one of the greatest privileges I had was being able to work with my dad. Brothers were there, It was great. But of course, when the stacker came in, the warehouses, the old warehouses along the river there, were not suitable for pallets, and the height of the ceilings were really made for people piling the height of their body. So the ceilings were very low. What you needed for stacker work and pallet work was huge warehouses with high lifts. So Tooley Street really became redundant with the stackers as the stackers came in. And of course, the old floors, with the health and safety. Health and safety to a certain extent in those days wasn't working. Piecework made people take risks that perhaps they shouldn't, so it was quite dangerous work.
Was there many accidents?
Many accidents, yes. But it was all part of that work. I think everybody, cuts and things like that, they were nothing to us. Eventually, we had safety boots coming and various other equipment that we had to buy them in those days. We had no sick pay, no pensions when we were in Tooley's, when we were casual men. And one of the reasons that dockers fought for their severance was because dock work was never a drain on the national economy, because we funded our own unemployment. The men who were at work paid so much for the people who were unemployed. That was another system, if you was unemployed all the week, I think I got £4.10 for the whole week. It was 5 shillings each time you bumped on, as they called it, a bumper. And at the end of the week, they made it up to £4.10. But dockers very rarely got it, because they used to have a way of, if you've been claiming fallback money for 2 or 3 days, they would make sure you went to work on the last couple of days. So you very seldom got a full week. Another thing that used to upset men was when we worked Saturday morning, and the regulars used to not go to work. They blew out. Of course, the casual men then, who hadn't been to work all the week, would have to go and do their jobs for nothing, really. That caused a little bit of conflict among.
What was your feelings about the Tooley Street closing?
Choked. Absolutely choked. One of the first effects that had, my children were young at the time, and didn't seem as though there was any hope for us at all to go anywhere. It looked as though we were going to leave the industry. I came home and my lip began to swell, and it just swelled out. My wife sent for the doctor, and he gave me injections, you know, to get it down. But I didn't think it would affect me, but that was one reaction that I had. I know my brother, he had a burst, something in his stomach, you know, and he was taken into hospital. I think, of course, the Surrey sector at that time was still open, and so we did get some work, but we only had to ring in once every 3 weeks. It was your turn to ring in to see if you could get work. So you were on fallback money at that particular time. It seemed to us, actually, that with employers, while we were casual men, of course, we were cheap labour. And when the employers had to give us, with the Devlin Report, regular employment, and they had to fund our holiday pay, and they had to give us sick pay. And of course, sick pay was one of the things that the government wanted to give them, because if a lot of the lads had to go on the social if they were sick with no sick pay. So I mean, there was a certain amount of pressure from the government, I imagine, and they brought in a pension scheme, £0.50 a week we paid towards it. The first lot of dockers who left the industry only got 10 shillings a week.
Who do you blame for the docks closing?
I'd like to say that it was the employers, and I perhaps would like to say to a certain extent some of the blame was ours, but from the dockers' point of view, we felt that we were fighting a losing battle, especially in Tooley Street, because the property values, I mean, you can see it now if you go down into the Tooley Street area now. And I mean, such was the value of property. Certain people tried to hold it off for a while, the profits that could be made through property. But such is the value that even now Suffolk Council is considering selling off to reap the benefits of the value of the property down there. And there are tenants who are at the moment opposing the Mark Brown's, the old Mark Brown's is now wasteland, but it will soon be part of the Mayor of London's. So, but the real reason for the closure, I believe, of Tooley Street was the new type of dock handling that was coming in, the container revolution. And you see, in the old days, in Tooley Street, the cranes, they were made for to pick up pallet boards, which I suppose we would load with just over a ton a time, and that would swing back to the ship, and we'd load it, and it'd come back to the shore for unloading. The cranes couldn't pick up more than about 2.5 tons. If you had something 5 ton, you join 2 cranes together and they pick up on a union purchase, you know, like something extra heavy. And if it was really heavy to load a boat, they would call for the heavy lift cranes that floated down the river, the jumbos and that, you see. But when the container revolution came in, a container weighed around about 20 tonne, its load, and you had the hydraulic lifts and the carry-cons, you know, to pick them up. And people could have them loaded at the warehouses, taken for custom clearance to the various depots, and they would then be lifted manually onto the boat, and that was the end of it. But with the way we were handling in the old days, it was unloaded in the docks, one gang. It was brought down in a barge, it was unloaded again into the warehouse, it was then unloaded again onto the lorries, and so it was multiple handling. So really, I mean, the container revolution just flattened it. That was the real reason, I believe. And of course, the age of the docks. You couldn't expand in Tooley Street. The roads were narrow, they were made for horses, you know. I can remember once saying to a carman down there, "I'll see you this afternoon, mate." He said, "You won't see us with these horses." He said, "They're going down the Knackers Yard at 12. You know, they were actually working them right up to the... But that was another story.
Did you finish your working life in the docks?
Yes. We became... after the dock scheme, the employers gave us notice. We left on the Monday, and I believe on the... We left on the Friday, and I believe on the Monday, agency workers took over our work. Possibly already trained, I don't know. They would have had to be trained, I imagine, because a lot of the jobs in the container part of it were, you had to be highly skilled. You had to train on them.
Do you miss working in the docks, Bernie?
Well, I would have had to pack up anyway in 5 years. You know, I was 60, and I was gradually becoming more disabled, you know. So in a way, perhaps I was fortunate.
But did you know that now, even if the docks were still going, do you miss that sort of
Miss it?
comradeship?
I'm always working in the docks, and I wake up in the morning and I've just unloaded a boat. I've just met people who I hadn't seen for years, you know. It's, I joke, I say that I worked last night and never got paid for it, really. It never leaves you. You know, it's...
When you meet up with ex-dockers, what do you do?
Just discuss docks, I suppose, really. There are various places that dockers meet. There's the Surdock Club over there. Every Wednesday they have an old dockers afternoon, all the retired dockers, and they have some sort of sing-song in there. I don't personally go there very often, only occasionally. But you see, when Tooley Street closed, it really split the docks and the relationships that we had, except for the local lads, you know. It really, because when we went into the other sectors, a lot of us went into shift work. That halved the relationships that people had, because one lot were going to work in the morning and one lot were going to work of an afternoon, you know, in the late shift and early shift. So
while we've been doing this project, we've heard of instances where men have not been able to adjust to life after the docks, and have any like committed suicide? Have you heard of any of them?
Well, no, but after the closure of my particular place, um, there were a couple who died very shortly afterwards, within weeks. One man actually, he received a notice, and when his wife came home on the evening, he was dead, and then his notice was on the table. It was the employers and the management that we had was very, very good. I can remember once one of them saying to me when Severance was around, because, you know, as Severance gradually came, you thought, should I take it, should I take it? And one of the managers said to me, like, when I was thinking of applying for it, he said, what do you want to leave here for? He said, it's going to be good here. They were building a new shed, and he said to me, it's going to be good here. I said to him, yeah. I said, but I said, it might be okay if you and the managers, you know, at the moment are allowed to run the scheme. I said, but you're going to get word from higher up that we've got to go, and that's it. And I think really what happened after the after they did away with the scheme, the registration, I think the lawyers and the solicitors were the people who told the employers that they've got to get rid of us, otherwise, you know, the scheme will be created again in some ways, you know. So I think the pressure was legal, really, to get rid of us.
Yeah. With the, you know, when the docks was working in this area, and there was like a community spirit, and, you know, everyone had some sort of connection to the docks. How do you think the community is now since the closure of the docks?
Yeah, because the community in Southwark has changed enormously. I mean, we've got people now from other countries that would never have known of the docks as it was, you know. It's the whole community in Suffolk has changed, and it's a long time ago now since the closure, and I suppose many of the men are getting old now, so it's all, they've accepted it philosophically, really. You see, when we were casual men, working in different wharves and warehouses each day, you could work in 4 or 5 different places in a week. So you had contact with everybody. And Tully Street, my area in particular, was known, they used to call it a village. Everybody, I mean, you didn't know their surnames, or most of them, you know, unless you were close to them. It was all Charlie, Dick, and nicknames, you know. So as soon as you referred to a nickname, you know, somebody knew it, you know.
What was the community spirit like then in those days, in the area?
Well, it was wonderful. It's hard to describe, really, because but the community spirit was really towards the docks, you know. I mean, the comradeship and the companionship were working during the time you were working, really, you know. It was just the dock area, and as dock areas are everywhere, really, I suppose.
Do you think the closure of the docks has benefited this area or been a disadvantage?
Well, if you take my wife's point of view now, she can go to Tesco's and places like that. We never had much shopping in this area in those days. I suppose if I was to... I'm quite happy with the developments over there the way it is. I think the area might be better because of that. Because, I mean, we had timber lorries, we had industrial lorries and all sorts of things, backwards and forwards. Timber lorries were very dangerous lorries. We had rear signs where they tipped over. It was quite common in those days.
What was the... Can you recall many accidents in the docks?
I can recall accidents, yes, but...
A lot of fatalities.
Most of the fatalities were in the enclosed docks, and of course, although you heard of them, you were not possibly in contact with them. I mean, I've witnessed odd accidents, you know, where people have been hurt, their pelvis smashed with, you know. It's a very dangerous occupation because the crane was lifting something over your head. You never wore any safety helmets or anything like that. The men were working underneath the load. Somebody would shout under and you'd dive for cover, you know, as what they called a greenacre. It was a spillage of cargo came down. I really, I can't see really how health and safety would have allowed half of the methods that we used to use now. I really think it would have destroyed the industry now. Rubber, for one thing. I mean, they used to unload rubber from the top warehouses, and rubber came in all different shapes because when it was loaded abroad, hot weather, it squashed the weight of a barrel of rubber, squashed into all different shapes. Well, the driver would be on his van down below, and you'd be perhaps 6 floors up, getting that rubber out in what they call a sling. I really don't think that the health and safety would allow it now.
Have you know, you said you've seen some of the new redevelopments. Have you been round to some of the old dock places and seen how they are now?
If you mean in this area? Yes, I have, yes.
What do you think?
I suppose if the docks are not there, then it's... You know, people used to say about rich people coming into an area. Well, when money comes into an area, the area usually goes up, not down. It's when money goes out of an area that they become derelict and slums. So, you know, I'm quite happy with the prosperity that's coming into this area. Hope some of it rubs off more on the people in the area.
That's about all with the questions. Is there anything else you'd like to add to these questions I've asked before we go on to the newspapers?
I can't think. Oh, there was a couple of points that I'd like to make. In the old days, the docker was a cat muffler, and probably in tattered old suits or something like that, you know, and he was looked down a bit, perhaps, on general population. But there were reasons for him dressing like that in those days, you see, because the muffler was something that he could use over his face in dusty conditions. And he always used to carry a hook I mean, I'm not sure that the law would allow this now, of course. I mean, I suppose it's really a dangerous weapon. But a docker had to carry a hook, and he had to wear old clothes, and because as a casual worker, he could never tell where he was going to work. If he went to work dressed, you know. I mean, in the old days, if you were not employed in the morning, some of the lads used to go to work a bit dressed up, thinking they might have the afternoon off and go somewhere. And sometimes if the managers saw somebody dressed like that, they'd send him to work, you know, and there were jobs like lamp black and flour, and you know, it wasn't wasn't very pleasant. So dockers, when dockers were decasualised, that was one of the greatest improvements they had. They had a locker where they could put their clothes, change their clothes, you know. I mean, people were going home like city businessmen, you know, once they got somewhere to change their clothing.
What was that name? Someone was telling me about it. So it gets in your pores.
Gets in the pores of your skin, and you can bath and it's still there. They say something like miner's coal, I suppose, but lamp black seemed to, which is sort of lead pencil really, and because some people walked about like ghosts, you know, smothered in flour. And down at Butler's we had a spice place there, and you'd see men walking about in the old, smothered in yellow stuff, you know, yellow men. They worked in the mill down there. They weren't really dockers, but they were attached to the docks.
What about, also about unloading sugar? It used to be like...
Sugar, yeah. You see, when sugar first started coming over, it was in 300-weight bags. They gradually reduced it down because, you see, I mean, the docker didn't mind tearing a sugar bag because he thought it shouldn't be that heavy. And you needed two men to... So it was quite common to rip the bag. I mean, like, not deliberately, but he wasn't interested. His physique was what he wanted to save. And I mean, not all dockers were blooming muscle men. Some of them were... You tried to keep fit in the docks because if you were fit, you worked easy. If you were not fit, you worked hard. So when they had these 300-watt bags, I mean, sometimes you had to... when you loaded a ship, it went down the middle through the hatch, but the ship stretched out and under the wings, so you had to carry the sugar on your back, what we call dumping, into the wings. Although, in actual fact, I'm sorry I'm getting this wrong, because it was when we was unloading it, we was carrying it out of the wings. The sugar was loaded abroad, of course, you know. But other cargoes, of course, that we were loading to go abroad, we used to have to carry into the wings. And then...
said about with the sugar. You used to get down in your
clothes, that's right.
And it'd rub like sandpaper.
It's sandpaper, you see, and it's also sticky. And when a boat came over, it's probably gone through the tropics, and the sugar is like a glue, and the bags are welded together. So when a docker tried to move the bag, he was also breaking it away from where it was stuck to the other bags. So in actual fact, he was using more strength. We used to have the jobs that we did. I think, I mean, we athletes train, but I think ordinary men in those days were doing feats of strength that were incredible. I mean, 6 men unloading a Jaffa boat, a whole of Jaffas and things like that. And of course, in those days, they were carried on the shoulders or trucked away on trucks. sorted into various marks. And of course, when the pallet revolution came in, that did away with lots of men, because they came over on pallets that were already sorted into their marks. I mean, with Jaffas, you had so many different, you had pictures, you know, Pardes, citrus, sweet melon, you know, all that sort of thing, you know. And so you needed quite a large shore gang to sort them into their various places. Landing tea, you have 40 odd men trucking away from, loaded by escalator, and it came down various chutes and slides from the river. Then it was unloaded and sorted into various beds, you know, like numbered beds for each. And you have 45 men actually in the gang doing that job.
What was it like with rats on a ship with fruit or something?
Yeah. I can remember grown men sort of jumping up and holding their trousers up with a little tiny mouse, you know. I mean, I remember one job we had was on birdseed, and it was Alfred Hitchcock. The birds had just about come out, you know, and as we were unloading the birdseed, the pigeons were gathering, thousands of them, along the top of Butler's Wharf there, you know, and as you unload, of course, the rats or the mice gradually move into the cargo that's still there. So when you got to the last bit, you know, you could expect something to come out. We used to stand about, you know, trying to get them, but you know, it's hard to catch a rat. You could stand there with a lump of wood in your hand, but very seldom you got it. He was gone.
I think that's it. So we move on to some of these
Yeah,
did you, I'll tell you what I do want, Bernie. Let's follow this pen. What years you was in the docks?
I went in docks in 1950. That was Tully, and after the closure of Tully Street, I then went into containers, and I was there for another.
About 72, wasn't it? Something like that.
Yeah.
Containers.
And I was there for about another 19, 20 years.
So when did you finish? 92?
When did I finish?
Well, must have been about that.
92.
Yeah.
No, what's it now? 99. That's only 2 years ago.
No.
It's longer than that, because I've been retired longer than that, and you was retired.
60, wasn't I? I'm 67 now.
Yeah.
7 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
92.
Yeah. When you say retired, redundant. Yeah.
No, just so when you come up on the screen, we can just put the name and your years in the docs. That's also so.
Yeah.
Right. And we also did you sort out some of your poetry?
Yeah. Actually, it's all here.
It'd be great to.
I think personally that I foresaw the closure in some ways in one of the poems that I wrote.
We spoke to one. What was that? He worked mainly in the Millwall dock, and he said they knew a girl who works in the PLA offices, and she told them in something like 1960 that there was meetings about closing the docks. In the 50s or so, it was.
There's an article here that was. Oh, I was told that when I was in Tully Street, actually.
Yeah, it's like, I'm saying there's a rumour, but you know, no one sort of could get to the bottom of it.
Well, in actual fact, there was an old chap, and he said to me, he said, you know, this is all down going to be parkland, he said. You know, I just looked at him, I thought, you're nuts, you know.
Yeah.
But it's true. I mean, if you look at Mark Brown's Wharf now, it is parkland.
Where's Mark Brown's Wharf? In Tilly Street?
At the side of Tower Bridge.
Potter's Fields.
That's right. It's now parkland.
Can we take this out of here so we can get it? Does it come out so we can get it?
Yeah. Well, this was an article then. I'm not sure whether you'd want that, but
We can get a
but what it did, it was the poem actually that I wrote at the time. I was at the West India Dock, and I was on transfer, and in those days the Canary boats were there, and I was coming off one of the boats, walking down the gangplank, and this old chap said to me, is this your sector, boy? So I said, no, mate. I said, I'm at Compton Turley Street. Core, he said, you want to get a transfer into this sector, he said. I said, yeah. So he said, yeah. He said, it's marvellous here, he said. He said, they're mechanising everything here, he said. Everywhere you look, he said, they're mechanising the place, he said. So I went home that night and I thought about him and I wrote mechanise, and it's spelt mechanise actually. They're mechanising everything. They're modernising the game. They're bringing in the stacker and they're turning away the crane. They're putting things in boxes and bringing in new boats. They're chucking away the scaleboards and they're dumping all our ropes. They're doing away with labour. They're ruining the game. It looks as though the future will never be the same. I think that at that time, that was 1986.
86,
Wasn't it?
yeah.
You know?
Now it's like
it-
private sports club.
It's as though we've been destroyed, and they want to forget us. Actually,
Yeah.
you know, Joe Gibbs was one of the characters of the docks, and his colleagues used to joke he's a poet and don't know it. There's another fellow there, Mr. Jim Howlett, actually, and he was his friend, and he sent this poem in to them. It's about the old lads and their allotments. There's a picture here from the port which I put with it. Time on their hands. As you stroll through the Connaught, some allotments you will see. Old dockers, stevedores and factory hands and men who've been to sea. They toil their plots from dawn till dusk and stand and have a chat of times gone by and absent friends, and of this and that. They reap and sow and watch things grow and water the soil well. They hoe their plots and grow shallots and watch their marrows swell. They swap ideas to get the best, to grow the biggest harvest, but only get out what they put in while being the bravest. Around midday they down their tools and stroll to Scrutton's Club to have a pint, to quench their thirst, for it's better than the pub. Then back they come to start again, some praying for it to rain, whilst others sit in their deck chairs and ease their aches and pains. As you pass by in your flashy cars, just take a glance and gaze. For these old boys, what time is left to finish off their days? With peace of mind, you see them standing all aglow, watching and waiting for their seeds to come through, or even make a show. The humming of the bees in the trees, the whistling their song of mirth, for these men are nearer to God on their plot of land than anywhere else on earth. So spare a thought for these old chaps who plant and grow their veg, then go home tired and have their tea and are ready for their bed. This old chap was 74 years old at that time. When the new year came in, the ships used to whoop their sirens, and they sent rockets up in the air, and you'd hear the crew calling, you know. And it's now strangely silent, you know. New Year, you go out, you stand on the landing, and apart from an odd sort of shout or something, you know, it's very silent. And so I was moved to write this, Dockland New Year. It's midnight. Television sends synthetic cheer, but Dockland is quiet. Gone the sound of ship sirens bringing in the year. The crew's whoopee, though lonely cry. Rockets cracking, flash in the sky. Men trying to unite with home by sound, the way lovers parted dream the same moon. Strain the ear, and if the wind is right, the sound of a now distant boat kindles memories of yesteryear. The soul has gone from London's Dockland on New Year's night, but for those of us who remember the only way of life, this silence and the memory cuts as deep as the knife.